Smoke rose like black rivers into the sky and the sun looked weak behind the ash. Towers that once touched the clouds were cracked open and bleeding fire. Streets that once sang with market voices now echoed with sirens and falling stone. The alien world felt smaller with every blast. Families hurried through narrow alleys with blankets over their heads, trying to hide children from the rain of sparks. Soldiers with dented armor and tired eyes guided people toward basements and tunnels. They whispered, "Be quiet, keep moving, do not stop." In the council chamber the leaders stood around a table that shook with each distant strike. Their faces were gray in the cold blue light. Someone held a cup with both hands just to stop the shaking. Another pressed a cloth to a cut on her temple and said she was fine. They all knew she was not. A young officer pushed open the doors with breathless urgency and said the outer ring had fallen. The eastern defense grid was gone. The enemy had cut power to the river district and was pushing toward the heart of the city. The words landed like stones inside every chest. They stared at the map. They stared at each other. They stared at the ceiling as if mercy might be written there. Outside the chamber the city screamed again. A roof folded, a wall let go. Dust blew down the corridor like a low cloud. The oldest counselor said in a quiet voice that pride was heavy and grief was heavier. Then he looked at the communications tower through the cracked window and said the only choice left was to send a message into the stars. The room went still. For years they had taught their children to stand on their own feet. For years they had told themselves they needed nothing from the galaxy. Now their streets were on fire and their hands were empty. Someone whispered that no one would answer. Someone else said even if someone answered the price would be cruel. The leader looked at the live feed of the hospital, at a nurse pulling a child from under a broken beam with her bare hands, and decided that fear of a price was smaller than fear of another funeral. They moved as a group toward the tower. The stairs were cracked and bent. The smell of hot metal clung to their tongues. The technicians worked in a tight circle under flickering lights. Cables ran across the floor like tired snakes. The chief technician wiped grease from his fingers and said the long-range array could still push a signal if the auxiliary crystals held an if. The roof dish could turn without jamming, and if the next strike did not knock the tower from its bones. Too many IFS. But IFS were all they had left. The leader told them to prepare the core, keep the message simple and true. Simple words travel farther than fancy ones. The room dimmed as power rebalanced. The crystals woke, each one with a small voice. Together those voices made a low, strong hum. The leader stood at the microphone that was older than anyone in the room and spoke in a steady voice, not a king's voice, not a general's voice, only a neighbor's voice. We are under attack, our cities burn, our children cry, our defenses fail. We ask for help, we have little to trade. We offer our thanks and our promise to stand with you when we can stand again. We will not forget any hand that lifts us today. The words were not perfect, but they were honest, and the honesty felt warm in a cold hour. The message was folded into light and radio and narrow needles of tight beam math. The dish above turned with a grinding groan and aimed into a slice of sky that was least thick with smoke. The chief technician flipped 3 heavy switches and the tower trembled. Then the message left them. It went up past the ash where birds no longer flew, past the thin high air that had never tasted fire, out into the silence where distance is a kind of ocean. It passed dead satellites that drifted like bones. It slid by broken stations where dust floated in slow circles. It bounced against relay stones that still remembered old routes. Each bounce was a new shout. Help us, help us, help us. In the streets below the first reply was the answer of more explosions. Then sirens. Then the soft sound of people trying not to cry. The council waited. They waited on their feet because chairs felt too soft for a moment like this. A technician cupped his hand around one ear and listened to noise that had no shape yet. A child in a nearby shelter asked her mother if the stars could hear. The mother said yes because a yes was the only gift she could give. Hours moved like injured animals, slow and painful. The tower hummed and sweat ran down backs. The first reply that formed was static that hissed and faded. The second was a cold voice from a far empire that sent regrets and advice to lay down arms. The council did not answer that voice. There was nothing to say. The third was an automated loop from a trade guild that said assistance was unavailable at this time. The fourth was an empty channel full of ghosts. More replies came, but they were the same shape. Closed doors politely painted. The leader felt his throat tighten and swallowed the feeling because there was no time for private sorrow. In an alley a medic tied a strip of her own jacket around a soldier's leg and told him to breathe slow. By the river a pilot with half a wing landed a transport on wheels that shook like teeth. In the market, a baker lit a small fire and warmed a few sweet cakes he had saved in a tin. He handed them to children with shaking hands and said, "Taste sugar, remember sugar." In the school vault, a teacher told a story of the first fire ever lit by their people and how the dark did not vanish but it stepped back one step. And that is all a light has to do sometimes. Step the dark back, even a little. The message kept moving. It reached thrones built on fear and those thrones looked away. It reached free stations that were brave but small and they sent a wish that hurt their hearts. It reached pirates who smiled and pressed delete. It reached wanderers who promised to pray though prayer could not stop shells. The message reached a place most maps drew as a mess of warnings. A corner of the galaxy where the stars seemed thick and rough. Instruments that watched the dark there woke with a sharp blink. Operators who were not easy to frighten leaned forward and said, "Play that again." Inside a command room with no windows, people stood around a table of light. Their uniforms were scarred, their boots had seen long roads. They read the words and did not laugh. They did not look away. They remembered a time when their own skies had glowed like this and no one came. Their hands held the memory like hot iron. They had taken that memory and built ships out of it. Ships with hulls thick as cliffs and spines that did not bend. They had become the ones that the galaxy named with a mix of fear and respect, Deathworlders. They spoke little. A pen clicked, a file opened, a dozen engines woke somewhere far below the floor with a sound like thunder that had not yet found rain. Back on the burning world, the council did not know what had shifted. They only knew the enemy had pushed deeper and the hospital had run out of clean bandage. The leader went to the roof of the tower and looked at the sky because looking at the sky felt like the right thing to do. A breeze blew ash into his hair and made him look older. The technician below him tuned the receiver again. Twice, 3 times, and then a thin line grew on the screen like a thread pulled through cloth. A voice arrived on the old emergency band that had not seen use in years. It was steady and low and it carried the weight of a hand placed gently on a shaking shoulder. Message received. Hold. The room did not explode with cheers. Not yet. Everyone stood still as if sudden movement might scare the words away. The technician played the line again to be sure. The leader closed his eyes for a breath and let out the breath slowly. Below them the city still burned. The enemy still moved, but something in the air changed. The kind of change that tells a heart to keep beating. In the shelter's mothers repeated the words to their children and the children repeated the words to each other. In the alley, soldiers carved the words into the sides of broken trucks with knife points. In the hospital, the medic wrote the words on the wall with a marker and said, "Read that every time the pain is loud." In the market, the baker gave away his last cake and laughed for the first time in days because the laughter felt like a roof over a small room. Scouts on the outer streets reported new enemy armor. The enemy broadcast a demand for surrender with a voice that tried to sound kind. The city answered by saying nothing and holding its ground. The night was long again. But the night did not feel the same. Somewhere far away and very near at the same time something large had begun to move. Engines were warming. Courses were being set. Plans were being written with the care of surgeons. The message that had left with shaking hands had found ears that were more dangerous than any invader, and those ears had listened, and those hands had begun to lift. The world was still in ruin. The roofs still fell. The streets still yawned with heat. But a thread now tied all those broken pieces together. It was thin and it was strong. It ran from the tower through the people and up into the dark where ships were waking. The leader stood on the roof until the cold got into his bones and then he went back down to work because hope alone does not hold walls. The technicians kept the receiver open. The soldiers kept their eyes on the alleys. The mothers kept telling soft stories. The baker kept the coals alive in case flour ever returned. The pilot slept in a chair with a map across his chest. The medic washed her hands until the stains did not come off anymore. The teacher began to write a new lesson on a piece of wrapping paper. The title was small and clear: How to Keep Breathing When the Sky is on Fire. The city did not know when help would arrive or what shape it would take, but the city knew 2 true things: that they had begged and that someone had heard. And knowing those 2 things was like finding a door in a wall where there had never been a door before. It did not open yet, not all the way, but it was there, and the handle was warm. The night did not end, it only shifted colors. The flames made the sky look like a false dawn and the smoke was so heavy that stars disappeared. The city below groaned like an old beast with too many wounds, and every street felt like the last street left. Families huddled in basements, their ears ringing with distant blasts. Children whispered to each other asking if the stars had heard them. And their parents repeated the only answer they had: yes, the stars heard. The leaders sat in the council hall again. faces drawn thin by hunger and fear. Some argued that the reply had been a trick, an enemy ploy to keep them resisting so they could suffer longer. Others clung to the words with trembling hands. Message. Received, hold, even if it was false. It was hope, and hope was all they had left. The invaders did not rest. Their machines crawled through the ruins. Their spotlights cut across broken windows. Their soldiers laughed when they saw defenders scrambling. To them this was another world falling like all the others. They broadcast demands across the air. Surrender now and you may live. Resist and you will burn. But the people had already chosen. They painted the words on walls in ash. They scratched them onto scraps of metal. Message received, hold. Even the wounded in the hospitals whispered it with cracked voices. It became a chant, not only for survival but for defiance. The enemy could burn the city, but they could not burn those words. Far away, in the dark beyond common maps, the Deathworlder fleet stirred, engines rumbled in hangars, ships rolled slowly out of docks, their hulls heavy with scars from old battles. Their officers moved with quiet purpose, no speeches, no parades, only work. They studied the maps of the burning world. They traced the enemy's paths. They planned with cold precision. They remembered their own past, the times when their cries had been ignored. And now they swore no cry would be ignored again. Not. If they could reach it, the commander gave only a few words. Prepare the fleet. And those words were enough. Soldiers tightened armor. Pilots strapped in. Engineers checked engines with steady hands. The fleet began to breathe as one. Back on the ground, the defenders fought with scraps of strength, rifles patched with wire, barricades built from broken doors. An old engineer rewired a generator from a shattered tram and gave light to a shelter. A medic cut strips from her own coat to bind wounds. A teacher calmed children by drawing stars on the floor with chalk. Outside, soldiers dug their boots into the dirt and promised each other they would not fall today. Rumors spread that strange lights had been seen in the sky. Faint glimmers through smoke. At first many dismissed it as fire or debris. But more eyes saw them. Steady, silent, watching, the whispers grew. They are coming, someone is coming. The invaders noticed too. Their commanders barked orders to scan the heavens. Instruments flickered with faint readings, shadows too big to be lies, but nothing clear enough to grasp. The enemy grew uneasy. They were used to crushing hope quickly. But now hope grew stronger with every whisper, every chant, every glance toward the sky. The council leader stood in the broken square at dawn and raised his voice, telling the people to endure a little longer. The words rolled across the crowd. Message received, hold. The voices repeated it back until the whole city seemed to speak as one. The invaders could not silence it. And though the defenders were bleeding, starving, and exhausted, they lifted their heads when the first real tremor passed through the sky, not thunder. Not storm, but engines so vast they shook the very air. The stars had not been silent after all. The smoke of the broken world hung heavy for days, drifting like a second sky, and the people below felt trapped between fire above and fire below. Their lungs burned, their throats cracked, yet still they stood because of the words that had reached them. Message received, hold. Those words were carved now into their hearts, whispered in alleys, scrawled on walls, sung softly by mothers to calm frightened children. Even as the invaders pressed closer, those words did not die. The enemy, proud and merciless, marched deeper into the city's bones. Their machines tore through barricades. Their voices broadcast demands for surrender. But the defenders only shouted back, hold. Their voices hoarse but unbroken. Every ruined street became a wall. Every rooftop became a last stand. The invaders could not understand why resistance grew harder the closer they came to victory. They did not know what moved silently above the ash. Far away in the black, the Deathworlder fleet began its march. Massive warships slid from their docks like mountains breaking free from the earth. Their engines burned with blue fire that lit the void. Their crews moved with steady purpose. No cheers, no parades, only focus. Every soldier remembered their own history. When their cries had once been ignored, when their skies had burned and no one came, now they were the answer. Now they would be the hand in the dark. In the command ship, officers studied the enemy's lines, marking every weak point, every stronghold, their voices calm, their eyes sharp, and when the commander spoke, it was not with fury but with the heavy weight of duty. The order was simple: prepare for descent, and across the fleet thousands of hands moved as one. Back on the ground, whispers spread faster than fire. Scouts claimed they had seen strange shadows against the stars. too steady to be meteors, too vast to be debris. Some said it was illusion, others swore it was true. The council leader listened and felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in weeks. Belief. He told his people to endure, to wait, to trust, and though doubt gnawed at many, they repeated the words again, message received, hold. The invaders felt it too. Their scanners blinked with faint warnings, readings they could not explain. Their commanders shouted that it was nothing, only noise, but in their voices hid unease, because silence can be explained, but shadows in the stars cannot. The defenders clung tighter to the hope unseen, their eyes lifting through smoke whenever the air trembled, their hearts beating faster at every glimmer in the heavens. They could not know what moved above them, but they could feel the storm waiting to break. The invaders did not yet realize it. But the tide of war had already begun to turn, for Deathworlders had heard the cry, and Deathworlders did not move halfway. They came in force, and when they arrived, the galaxy itself would shudder. The enemy pressed deeper into the city, their banners of flame casting shadows against ruined walls, their machines grinding forward with the certainty of conquerors. They had taken the outer districts, they had cut power, they had poisoned water, and still the defenders fought like ghosts, slipping from alley to alley, firing from rooftops, dragging the wounded through tunnels. The invaders broadcast their demand again: surrender and live, resist and die, their voices booming through loudspeakers. But the people only clenched their fists tighter. The council leader answered not with words to the enemy but with words to his people. Message received, hold, and those words rippled across the city like sparks in dry grass. They were not just a promise anymore, they were defiance. The defenders had little left, rifles patched with wires, grenades made from fuel cans, knives hammered out of scrap. Yet their will was sharp. Every ruined house became a fortress, every broken street a trap. They fought not because they thought they could win but because hope had been planted in their hearts. Hope that someone had heard. Hope that someone was coming. Above the smoke-choked skies faint shapes moved, too steady to be clouds, too vast to be tricks of the eye. Soldiers pointed upward, children pressed against cracks in shelter ceilings. Whispers grew. They are out there. They are watching. The enemy tried to silence these whispers. Commanders claimed the sky was empty. But even their own radar screens blinked with warnings they could not explain. Far away, the Deathworlder fleet was no longer preparing. It was moving, colossal ships sliding into formation. Their hulls scarred from old wars but unbroken, engines humming with power that shook the void. In the command ship the officers spoke in clipped voices. Target grids finalized, civilian shelters marked safe, assault vectors drawn across glowing maps. The commander's voice rolled steady, not loud, not dramatic, only final. We answer the call, and that was enough. Thousands of soldiers tightened armor seals, pilots ran hands over controls like they were greeting old friends. Engineers listened to engines roar awake. Medics stacked supplies with grim focus. The fleet breathed together as one storm waiting to break. On the burning world the defenders felt it, though they could not yet see. The air itself seemed to change, like the silence before thunder. Every heart beat faster, every fist clenched tighter. The invaders did not understand. They grew restless, scanning the skies, tightening their formations. But fear slipped into their ranks. They had crushed countless worlds before, but this one would not bow, and something in the stars was watching, something vast, something dangerous. The defenders fought harder that day, not because they thought they could win, but because they believed they only had to hold, just long enough, just until the storm broke above them. And when night fell again, their city burned. But their voices did not. They lifted them as one into the smoke, message received, hold, and somewhere beyond sight, the Deathworlder fleet heard them and drew closer. The city was more ruin than stone now, streets split open. Buildings sagged like tired giants, firelight painted. Everything in shades of red and black. Yet even as the invaders pressed harder, the people refused to bend. The defenders fought with scraps, rusted rifles, homemade bombs, knives shaped from broken steel. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a rebellion. But still they endured, because of the words that lived on every tongue. Message received, hold. Mothers whispered it into their children's ears when bombs fell. Soldiers carved it into the metal of barricades. Even the wounded muttered it in fever dreams. Those 3 words had become stronger than walls. They were the armor that no fire could melt. The invaders grew impatient. Their commanders could not understand why this world had not broken like the others. They sent in heavier machines, walking towers of steel that crushed whole streets beneath their weight. They poured fire into districts already blackened. But each step forward only fed the defiance. In the shadows of ruins, defenders struck with desperate courage. Small groups hit supply lines, children set traps in alleys. Elders threw stones at soldiers just to remind them that this world would not kneel. The invaders laughed at first, but soon their laughter grew thin, for no matter how many fell, the words still rose, message received, hold, and the sound of those words unsettled even the most hardened invader. Beyond the reach of the smoke, the galaxy whispered, merchants spoke of shadows moving from Deathworlder space. Rumors spread in hushed tones across trade routes. Entire fleets were said to be leaving their docks, vast warships vanishing into the black without word or warning. Empires that had ignored the SOS turned their eyes nervously toward those whispers. Some dismissed it, saying humans would not march for a world not their own. Others feared it, because they knew if the Deathworlders came, they would not come quietly, they would come like a storm. Far away, that storm was already building. The Deathworlder fleet stretched across the void in disciplined silence. Their ships scarred, massive, engines burning steady. They carried no banners, no proud songs, only purpose. Inside their command halls, officers traced enemy positions with cold precision. Every weakness circled, every stronghold marked. Their commander gave no long speech, only a single truth. They called, and we will answer. That truth was enough. Pilots kissed their controls. Soldiers locked helmets, medics strapped gloves. Engineers ran fingers across the humming spines of engines. The fleet did not prepare for glory, it prepared for duty, and when Deathworlders prepared for duty, the galaxy trembled. On the burning world the people could not see the fleet yet, but they felt the air shift. The silence carried weight. Soldiers on rooftops swore they saw faint shadows blotting stars. Scouts reported radar echoes too massive to ignore. Hope grew bold, whispered no longer but spoken aloud. They are coming, they are here, and though the invaders shouted that it was lies, their own instruments betrayed them. Strange readings flashed across their screens, too steady, too organized. Their commanders barked for calm, but their eyes flickered with unease, because even before the first shot was fired, they knew what was waiting above, and the people on the ground, broken but unbowed, lifted their voices into the night with the chant that had carried them through fire and ruin. Message received, hold, their cry rising into the smoke like a promise that the storm was near. The enemy believed the city was ready to collapse. Their commanders stood tall on mobile platforms, pointing toward burning districts and declaring that nothing could survive another night. Their machines pressed forward like iron beasts, claws tearing through rubble, cannons flashing in steady rhythm. Every explosion tore open the ground, and yet, from beneath the ash and smoke, voices still rose, voices that refused to die. Message received, hold. The words carried through shelters and tunnels, through ruined homes and broken streets. They carried like wind across fire. The invaders did not understand why fear had not silenced the people, why despair had not broken them. But the defenders knew, something vast was in the sky, hidden by smoke, unseen by eyes, but felt in their bones, like the first drop of rain before a storm. Scouts on rooftops whispered that stars were flickering, not from clouds or fire but from shadows too steady, too large. Instruments deep below the city blinked with warnings, signals too organized to be debris, too sharp to be false. The council gathered in their cracked hall, the ceiling sagging with each tremor, and they spoke in low voices. Some still feared it was a trick, others believed with every beat of their hearts. The leader lifted his tired eyes and said the words again. Message received, hold, and though his voice was hoarse, the room steadied, for even in doubt, hope was stronger than surrender. Far above, beyond the choking sky, the Deathworlder fleet waited, colossal warships drifting like mountains in shadow, their hulls scarred with the memory of countless wars, their weapons charged but silent, their engines humming in a rhythm that shook the void. They did not rush, they did not announce themselves. They studied every enemy formation with cold precision, every cannon, every ship, every weakness marked, inside the command vessel. The officers moved like gears in a great machine. Calm, steady, ruthless, and when the commander spoke, it was not with speeches, it was with a voice heavy with duty. The order rolled through the fleet like thunder across a valley. Prepare to strike, and hands tightened on controls, helmets sealed, rifles loaded, medics laid out stretchers, engineers whispered to engines. The fleet breathed as one. The storm was ready. On the ground, the invaders grew restless. Their soldiers glanced upward too often. Their machines slowed when radar screens lit with warnings they could not explain. Commanders barked for order. But fear had already crept into their voices. The defenders saw it and held firmer. Their eyes sharper, their hands steadier. Even the wounded smiled weakly when they heard the rumor pass from mouth to mouth. They are here, they are waiting, and in the silence before dawn, the city felt something shift. Not from within, but from above, the kind of shift that makes even the strongest enemy tremble. Because the defenders now knew they were not alone. And the invaders knew they were no longer hunters but prey. The Deathworlders had come. And the only reason the sky was still quiet was because the storm had not yet chosen to break. The city was breaking, but it did not fall. Fire turned night into false daylight and ash drifted like grey snow. The invaders roared in victory. Their commanders raised banners high, convinced the end was near. But their certainty cracked when the first shadow moved across the sky. Defenders on rooftops froze. Children in shelters pressed closer to their mothers. Soldiers in the streets looked up through the smoke and saw stars vanish behind something vast. Too steady to be cloud. Too sharp to be illusion. Whispers rushed through the city. They are here. They came. The words repeated again and again until they sounded like thunder rolling through ruined streets. Message received. Hold. The chant turned from a whisper into a roar. A sound so strong even the invaders felt it crawl into their bones. The enemy scrambled. Their machines shifted formations. Their ships pulled tighter orbits. Commanders shouted orders to fire into the sky. But there was nothing yet to strike, only silence, heavy, thick, the kind of silence that comes before lightning splits the world. Far above, the Deathworlder fleet revealed itself at last. Colossal warships sliding out of the black like mountains awakening. Their hulls scarred but strong, their engines glowing with steady fire. They filled the heavens in perfect formation, each ship a blade in the dark. The defenders gasped and wept openly, for no one had ever seen such power. The invaders who had crushed worlds felt their voices falter. Their scanners filled with warnings too numerous to count, and for the first time their confidence bent. In the command ship of the fleet, officers stood around a glowing map of the burning world, their faces calm, their hands moving with precision. Orders passed like iron through the halls, targeting grids locked, civilian shelters marked safe, strike patterns drawn. And then across every channel came a single voice, deep, steady, undeniable. We heard your call. The sound reached every ear. From the youngest child in the deepest shelter to the highest invader commander in orbit, the word struck. Like hammer blows, simple and final, the defenders cried out in joy, their voices mixing with sobs and laughter. The invaders stared in silence, their hands shaking even as they tried to steady their weapons. The city roared louder, not with fire, not with destruction, but with hope. Message received. Hold. Voices shouted from rooftops, painted across walls, carried by every survivor. The chant rose into the night until it seemed to meet the fleet above. And though no shot had yet been fired, the battle had already turned. The defenders stood taller. The invaders shifted nervously. For all could see that the storm had arrived, and when Deathworlders came in force, there was no escape, only judgment, waiting to fall. The silence did not last. It shattered in an instant when the first strike came. The sky lit up as if a second sun had torn through the smoke. Beams of fire lanced from above, cutting clean through the invader ships that had circled the planet like vultures. One moment those ships were roaring with confidence. The next they were breaking apart, their hulls snapping, their engines screaming before going dark. Explosions rippled across the heavens, raining debris like burning rain. The defenders on the ground lifted their heads in awe. They had lived in fire for weeks. But this fire was different. This was not destruction falling on them. It was vengeance falling on their enemies. The Deathworlder fleet had struck with precision, every shot chosen, every blast exact. Orbital cannons that had pounded the city for days were silenced in seconds, their barrels melting, their crews consumed before they even realized death had arrived. The invader fleet tried to regroup, but their formations shattered under the storm. Deathworlder warships moved with a unity that was terrifying. Colossal vessels sliding through the void with the grace of predators. Every weapon a promise kept. Every strike a message answered. They did not taunt. They did not boast. They simply destroyed with quiet, merciless efficiency. On the ground the people wept and shouted. Soldiers fired into the air not at enemies but in celebration. Families in shelters hugged and screamed with joy. Children clapped their hands. The words that had carried them through despair now returned as triumph. Message received. Hold. They shouted it into the smoke. Their voices so loud they seemed to shake the ruins. The invaders heard those cries too and felt fear crawl into their hearts. They had crushed countless worlds. But never had they faced an enemy like this. Never had they seen a fleet descend with such fury and discipline combined. The invader commanders screamed for their troops to stand. They shouted for more fire, but panic spread faster than orders. Their soldiers looked upward in terror, seeing the skies rain fire on their own ships. Their machines faltered, their weapons shook. The defenders seized the moment, pushing forward in broken streets, striking back with whatever they had left. Each step fueled by the sight of invaders falling under Deathworlder fire. The tide of battle had turned, and for the first time, the city felt alive again, alive not with fear, but with hope as sharp as a blade. Above the world the Deathworlder fleet pressed harder, engines blazing, weapons carving through enemy lines, no hesitation, no pause, every shot driving deeper into the heart of the invaders. The galaxy might have ignored the cry for help, but the Deathworlders had not, and their answer was written now in fire across the heavens. The invaders had come to break a world, but instead they found themselves broken, and the people below lifted their voices in unison, a roar that rolled like thunder. Through every ruined street, message received. Hold. Not a whisper now, not even a chant, but a victory cry, and the night sky burned with the proof that the words had been true.